Ready? It is Glenn Antizzo, Professor Antizzo, Associate Professor at Political Science, Mississippi College. And
no, he is not.
Here. So we do not have him connected yet. Okay, we'll move on to something else and see if you can do that, get it connected. But I had a couple of other things here, just opening. Victor Riviera, former CEO of Bronx Parents Housing Network. Okay, there we go. Glenn, are you there, sir? Mr. Professor Antizzo, you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so video is not working, so we got it on the phone, but that's fine. How are you, by the way? Haven't had you on in a while.
Really good. I got a big day coming up. I'm getting married a week from tomorrow, so been a busy time.
Whoa! Well, congratulations. Was the honeymoon in Tutwiler, or are you going to go a little beyond that?
5 nights in Puerto Rico and then 6 nights in the Virgin Islands.
Well, congratulations. That's it's about time for you to do this. I mean, how long did you string her on?
Well, it took me a little while, but we finally made it.
Come on, with a little Paisan blood, it shouldn't have taken you that long. But I'm not going to get in your personal affairs. Let's talk about this because we haven't talked about it in a while, and there are people talking about there that Putin is looking for an exit strategy, that the real chance of using some type of nuclear weapon now is even greater than before. I don't know, but you follow this, so give us an update of where you think we are now. Certainly, weeks and weeks after this thing started.
Yeah, well, now the war has entered a new phase. And, Paul, the first time we talked about this, I wouldn't have said it was possible. But I think Ukraine's got a real chance to win this war. Now, the question is, what does winning look like?
Right.
I think at the very least, this war probably ends status quo ante. In other words, that the Russians hang on to the territory they've got and the Ukrainians come out in every other way preserved. But the Ukrainians have launched some offensives which have cleared away Russian troops from the area around Kiev and the northeastern part of the country. The Russians are trying their hardest now. They've shifted the war in order to try to consolidate their control over Donbass. And there was an effort to try to get Odessa, but it looks like that's been beaten back. So it looks like that there is a really good chance, again, for the Ukrainians to hold their own on this. The Russian war dead is unbelievable. They've already lost about half of what we lost in 8 years in Vietnam, and they've done that in only 3 months. There are reports that troops are shooting themselves and damaging their own equipment. And the United States has really gone all in on this. Congress has approved $40 billion in aid, which includes $20 billion for weapons. And one of the things that we've been sending them are M777 Howitzers, which are really powerful guns, and they have evidently had devastating effect on Russian forces.
One of the things that's got to be demoralizing to him, Professor, is the fact that some of his touted new technology equipment, from ships to planes and a couple of tanks, were taken out rather early.
Yes. And it's not just the weaponry that's been taken out. There are a number of high-ranking officers. To my count, I think we're up to about 10 to 12 generals that have been killed on the battlefield. Although one of the things I think we've got to be careful about is that the administration has been crowing about the success and has been pretty open about that we've been the ones giving them the intelligence. That's something I would do. I would give the intelligence. I just wouldn't crow about it. Let the Russians come to whatever conclusion they want about how the Ukrainians are able to pull this off, but keep the hand of the United States as unapparent as possible.
Paraphrasing, but the statement he made this week was a little bit haunting when he said something like, all right, you guys keep pushing me. I want you to know by the end of the year we're going to have some new nukes out there, so just keep pushing. You better be giving me some respect. Again, that's paraphrased, but that's basically what he said.
That and I've heard that not just from him, but I've heard it from other people in his administration for a few months now. One of the things I I would like to think he's smart enough to figure out is that the prevailing winds blow east. So anything that he blows up in Ukraine is going to end up coming down in fallout in Russia.
But one way or the other, Glenn, he's set his country back economically on the world stage by decades and decades.
Absolutely.
I mean, as far as economically, because everybody from McDonald's, the oil companies, the Apple, I can go down the list. People said, no, we're through. We're not doing business there.
Yeah, no, I just saw that Starbucks this week also said that they're done with Russia.
You're right. God, how can they survive?
This has been absolutely devastating their economy, and that's just it, Paul. I don't think that they do survive this, at least not in the way they look now. One thing also is that we can see that all of their defense spending has created this hollow shell that really cannot support the war effort. I just don't see how this can go on a whole lot longer, maybe a couple of more months, 3 months. But I don't see how his economy could take this kind of beating. And I think that you will eventually see some demonstrations in Russia. I don't see – I know it's an authoritarian country, but I just don't see how a public is asked to throw their sons and daughters into a meat grinder in Ukraine while the economy gets slowly destroyed.
Well, one of the ways they can do this, Glenn, is they've got the same disinformation from the media that we have here. I mean, we'd have people who are rioting in the streets if some of the mainstream media were telling the story about Joe Biden the way it should be told. They have that same disinformation because they control the media in Russia. And they're telling people, stand by, everything's fine and dandy. You're doing this for country. But I agree with you. Sooner or later, that's not going to play out.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Paul. And because the same thing happened during the Russian invasion of Afghanistan in the 1980s. And what happened was, and this didn't get a whole lot of reporting there or here, but there were a number of demonstrations as the war dragged on for 8 years. People started asking, why is my son being sent to this godforsaken place, and what are we hoping to accomplish there? And there is reason to believe that may have, to an extent, driven the Russians' desire to negotiate an exit in 1980.
As far as diversity, they don't have a lot. I mean, it's really a poor country for the most part, especially when you try to support the military infrastructure that Russia wants to support. Because all they've got, basically, I say all, they've got other things as far as minerals and some of that, but oil is their big deal, and if they're losing some customers on that.
Oil is the big deal, and that is slowly but surely, I think, going to get shut down. I think that if the West wants to stay out, they're going to have to pull some more economic levers, and they're going to have to go after that a bit more aggressively. But one thing that that we haven't mentioned yet, and certainly it's made the news in the last few weeks, is that the very trouble that he went into Ukraine to stop, at least according to him, his own statements, was that he wanted to stop NATO expansion. And now he's going to have NATO's border with his country expanded by about 850 miles with the entry of Finland and Sweden into the alliance, which, looks like, it's hit a few speed bumps with Turkey, but it does seem to be something that is accelerating. And I think that Turkey is just looking to extract a few concessions from those two countries, and that they will eventually say the alliance will eventually say yes. And take
Professor Glenn Antizzo is a political science guy at Mississippi College. You mentioned this early on, Glenn. What does the new map look like? Should they settle with the status quo now, from where they are? It would be extending the Russian border into Ukraine. How many miles?
They have pretty much consolidated or are about to consolidate control over Donbass. But they have been driven away from Kiev, and I believe it's Kherson in the north. It looks like what they're doing is they've got this strip, and I'm sorry, I don't know exactly.
That's right. Do me a favor. Hold on right there. Don't put the marriage on hold, but just put the interview on hold for a second here, because I want to ask you some other things. And one of the questions I want to ask you would we be making a mistake if we think China is seeing how badly Russia is doing, and China may take a lesson on this as far as Taiwan. Would we be making a mistake in believing that type of theory? But I'll ask the good professor when we return. All righty. Let's get back to our visit with Glenn Antizzo, professor at Mississippi College. And the question was, when the leaders in China see all of this, see the economic damage and the cancellation, and how to repair that, it's going to take a long time. Do you think there's any influence of that at all as far as Taiwan's concerned?
It may make them think twice, Paul. Mm-hmm. And that is because, with Ukraine, all the Russians have to do is drive over the border and they can launch the invasion, and they can have the supplies that they need right on the border. And by the way, the Ukrainians have occasionally launched cross-border attacks in order to take some of those facilities out. But for Taiwan, one of the natural defenses that they've got is the fact that they're an island, and that there's 180 miles of open water that the Chinese Navy would have to cross. And Taiwan has, probably, I would guess, a lot more in terms of anti-ship missiles. And remember that you have a country that has been under Chinese threat since 1949. So these people have been training for decades for such an instance that could possibly arise. So my guess is that the Chinese would possibly be facing a very, very, very devastating Taiwanese defense that could be just as bad as what's going on for the Russians in Ukraine.
It was really scary because you start thinking about no other country in the world owes its everything good that's happening to it now to America more so than China, because they have sapped just about everything else and converted our capitalism to their own brand of capitalism.
Right.
So their wealth is dependent on us, the U.S., and if we had a cutoff in that relationship, not only would it devastate China, but it would devastate us because, for major corporations in this country, they have a larger customer base there than they do in this country.
Yeah, well, that is something that's sort of axiomatic in political science, and that is that nations that have robust trade with each other, generally speaking, do not go to war because the tie that binds is the trade, and they would lose too much. That's another thing, Paul. You raised a really good point, and I think that the loss of trade with the United States, the loss of trade with Japan, the loss of trade with Western Europe, I think would make the Chinese think twice about this. And I think that the Chinese are a bit more deliberative than the Russians are.
What happens to the debt that we owe them should there be an all-out war?
Wow. Even if there isn't an all-out war,
that's right. Even if
about that.
And I'm telling you something during the process of the possibilities of some type of legal action. I think it would have happened during the Trump administration as far as Wuhan is concerned. But that was one of the things I think they were worried about. But is there any clearly defined precedent on that? What would happen to that debt at some point? And could we cancel it as a sovereign nation?
That is a really good question. And I have to say, honestly, I don't know. I mean, there have been instances in the past where there have been debt crises. Mm-hmm. For example, in the 1970s, Latin American countries, most notably Argentina, had borrowed tons and tons of money, and they were about to go into default on their loans. So we loaned them more money to pay the interest on the loans that they weren't paying in the first place. But the amount that we owe the Chinese is so massive. If you think about it, a lot of the deficits that we've been running up over the last decade or two have largely been coming courtesy of the Chinese buying up American debt. Mm-hmm. That I think that it would threaten to bring down the entire international financial system.
I wonder also how the health of Putin is, because we heard that he had an operation and that kind of was smoothed over a little bit, and so you're thinking the best way for him to rehabilitate his power, his name, his legacy is just to say, okay, this is what we wanted. We'll leave it at that. We'll leave it, and this is our land now, and then stop it.
Yeah, well, Henry Kissinger was, I believe, in Davos last week, and he was saying himself that a negotiated end to the war is probably the way to go, with the Ukrainians making territorial concessions to the Russians, and that the Ukrainians formally recognize the annexation of Crimea and recognize the independence of those two states that the Russians have carved out in the Donbass region, but because of the success that Ukraine's had on the battlefield, they have absolutely dismissed out of hand any such possibility. But I think at the end of the day, that may be where this ends up, because I think what's going to end up happening is you're going to have this situation that we often find ourselves in when we intervene in places where neither side can strike the death blow on the other, and therefore the war just ends status quo ante, that the situation will not change. The Russians will probably make some proud noise about how they've cleaned out Nazis from eastern Ukraine and that they have stabilized the situation, and they'll probably have some sham referendum to show that they've got support in the area. But I don't see them really being able to do a whole lot more than that. The Ukrainian military, especially with the supplies that are flowing in, is just too much for the Russians to handle, at least, judging by the tactics that we've seen them use so far.
Putin may say that he's gotten an agreement from Zelensky that he will not continue his nuclear proliferation. So he's already said that he wanted to attack him, and it's been kind of weird. Let me switch. I wish we had more time here, but let me switch topics. Political science has got to be a great time to just be in front of a class and hear where thoughts are. But gas prices, I was looking at Atala County. The average gas price in Atala County is $4.35 a gallon. Our average across the state right now is $4.17. The average across America is $4.60. And if you're trying to buy diesel, which runs America's trucks and our supply chain, it's somewhere around $6 or $7 in some places. How in the world can the Democrats recover from this?
They are going to be looking to issues like the upcoming abortion decision, and they will try to use the shooting in Uvalde to maximum benefit. But I think you are absolutely right on this. At the end of the day, people vote their pocketbook. And when you have historic inflation, the last time I saw inflation, or any of us saw inflation, I was still an undergrad in college 40 years ago. Yeah. I just do not. I think this is too much for the American people to swallow because, for example, a lot of people who are still getting raises are finding that their raises are more than offset by the increase in prices. And you're right. I found one place out in Brandon yesterday that was still selling gas for less than $4, but it wasn't by much. It was, I think, $3.97. Everywhere else, you have the average price in all 50 states, $4 plus, and they're talking that possibly by the end of the summer, $6.
Yeah, not going down, but going up. And then the president recently says, we're going to come out of this thing great. We're going to be all green by the time we get out of this thing. This guy's demented in more ways than one. Gun issue, before I let you go here, on the gun issue. When you're talking to your students and they say, well, we need more gun controls, and do you ever tell them, okay, let's take this instant here, whatever the current shooting tragedy happens to be, for us to have prevented that with every circumstance that we know, what law would have had to be in place? And if that law was in place, how many other people would be in jail because of that law? I mean, here's a guy, had no mental record. He had no arrest record for the most part. He was kind of weird. He was a loner.
Right.
But when you start looking, then, as I mentioned, Perez and I mentioned the other day, there are a lot of people that respond to us on social media in the talk show business. Then they sound kind of threatening. But how do you do that? What law would you enforce that wouldn't injure a lot of innocent people?
Yeah, I mean, criminals by definition are not going to obey the law. That's why they're criminals.
Yeah.
But you look at the places in the United States, pardon me, like Chicago, that have some of the strictest gun laws, and they are hyper violent. I just don't see how you can completely stop something like this tragedy from happening.
Yeah.
One thing, though, I've been talking to some people about this. One thing, though, I think we need to do, Paul, is we need to come up with one definition of an adult.
And also an assault rifle. I'm going to give you the last word. We got a quick break here, but hang on. Final segment's coming up next. Back live, final segment here with the good professor from the Trustmark Studios. Trustmark's retirement planning will fit your plans to a T. People you trust, advice that works. Okay, on the gun issue, and you had something else you wanted to just mention, and I don't know if anybody has a solution on here, but your thoughts, sir.
Well, before I do anything else, let me just correct something I said earlier. The town that the Russians have been driven from was not Kherson, was Kharkiv. I just want to make sure I got that out there.
Uh-huh.
Just getting to what I was saying before, we've got all these different ages for where we define adulthood. You can get married in many states at like 15 or 16. You can't drink until you're 21. You can't smoke until you're a certain age. And one of the things that I think is concerning is that you're seeing young people in many cases engaging in a lot of these mass shootings. And maybe what we need to do is decide on one unified age at which you become an adult. I'm not saying that it would have changed the situation, but maybe the gun ownership age for certain classes of firearms should be 21. It strikes me as a bit odd that you can own an AR-15 at 18, but you can't have a drink until you're 21. So that's the only point I was making. But the problem is that you go back and you look at the case at Sandy Hook. That was a gun that was in the household. The kid did not actually have the gun himself. It was his mother's gun. Now, maybe the mother bought it for the kid on the sly, but the fact of the matter is that if the gun is there, you cannot stop someone who is criminally minded, or I shouldn't say you can't, but it's very difficult to stop somebody who's criminally minded from acting on their intent if they grab the gun.
The other part of that is that I would hope that even the NRA, which is a fine organization, don't get me wrong, but I would hope we during their meeting, which is coming up this weekend, and the president is going to be speaking, to come up with some solution that is palatable to both sides. But again, we don't need new laws that are just passed to make the liberals feel good, because that's all they care about. Then they march on. They don't give a damn if they work or not. We got this passed, and it hurts more legally owned good citizens and bad citizens. So that's not what we really need.
You're absolutely right. And what happens is that every time something like this happens, you've got a lot of people who are, obviously with the families in Uvalde that are very, very worried about this happening again. But you've got other people who are using this to advance an agenda. I mean, it was shameless to see, for example, Beto O'Rourke show up at the press conference and grandstand in the way he did.
Listen, there was the other part of that story is he said he just extemporaneously, he happened to be by there, he walked in, which was a bald-faced lie, because now we know he had two people hold his seat for him, and he was coming in at the last moment. It was all planned. So as soon as they saw him walk in, they got up and gave him the seat they were saving for. So it was all planned. It just stinks to high heaven.
Yeah, no, and again, Rahm Emanuel famously said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste," and that appears to be what's happening with some elements on the left with this. Again, I don't want to dismiss people of goodwill who are, in fact, worried. And you're right. This NRA conference that's being held this weekend, they should either do one of two things. It strikes me as incredibly tone deaf if they're going to go into a full-throated defense of their position, given what just happened, within the last few days. But you could, Paul, you are absolutely right. They could buy a lot of goodwill with the public if they themselves used this meeting as a way of putting out some ideas for how to get a handle on this problem.
If there are ways to, first of all, one of the ideas is if you're still living with your parents and you go out and you want to buy an AR-15, at least have your parents' permission if you're only 18 years old. I agree with you. Now, if you have a problem with that one, then we really got a problem. Now, I understand you can join the military, and I have no problem with that if you're 18 years old and if you're in the military, because you're being trained and you go through psychological tests. That's a little bit different. I don't think this guy could have gotten in all the way through the military.
Also, we're just now sort of beginning to get the full story about this guy. Before the original story was that the guy had shown no signs of any trouble, and now we're beginning to find out that the guy was troubled, that he had contacted people, and basically related his intent, that he was upset, among other things, because he was not graduating high school. And it's beginning to appear that there has been some sort of a delay in the police response, and that perhaps this could have been handled better by the local authorities.
Yeah.
I don't really know much about criminal justice and how things like this get handled, but on the reading I've done, it seems like most experts are saying that when you've got an active shooter who is firing with a large magazine, that you rush in there. You don't wait. Evidently,
that's it. And apparently, they waited over 60 minutes to a little bit longer than that. I wish we had a couple of more minutes, but we don't. Look, congratulations on your marriage. Have a great, great honeymoon, and we thank you so very much for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much, Paul. I really appreciate it. I enjoy every time I'm on.
You got it. Thank you, man. Glenn Antizzo, Associate Professor, Political Science, Mississippi College.